Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all my new subscribers. Good morning to all my regulars, all the travelers in the house, and all the new people in the house. I want to say a very, very special good morning to you all. TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. It's the beginning of the weekend, and I hope you all had a productive week. And I hope you all had a fantastic week. And all that you intended to do, you got done. And if it wasn't completely done, it's getting close. To everybody who was in the live last night, I want to say thank you so much for your support. I sincerely appreciate it. Today, we are going to be continuing with the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Oh my gosh! Things Jamaicans, I thought about you yesterday. I said, I ain't seen things in a little bit. I ain't seen things in a little bit. I'm gonna go hunt her down. And I guess great minds think alike. Here we were thinking about each other, huh? How are you doing, my sweets? How are you doing, my love? So good to see you as always. It's always an absolute pleasure being in your company, like being in good company, in the company of royalty, huh? And moi. Love you, sugar. Hope you're having a great day. We are going to continue the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Those of you who were here yesterday, we are at the part where Drake has just won that race that they ran against, what was his name? That young kid. And the first time Drake had lost, and now the second time for the rerun, he won. Sweetwoods has reached Sunset, him and his henchmen, and they have found Amos, who they have been looking for weeks. They have gone to the hotel. Amos has seen them. He jumps down the fire chute, takes off. Drake enters the hotel, and he's the one ending up facing the thugs. And what do you know? He gets shot. That was the end of chapter 25. So this morning, we are going to move on to chapter 26. Oh, she's, I thank you, my sweetheart. I thank you so much. So we are on to chapter 26. Are you in love with him? Clara was so surprised by Tommy's question that she gasped. They had been sitting in the pickup truck, waiting for Drake to return. She had been anxiously watching the hotel while her son drummed his fingers on the door. When he spoke, it was the first time either of them had said a word about Drake since he left. I, I, it's, she stammered, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wasn't sure how to talk about it with her son. Tommy turned to look at her. With the way you kissed, I figured that things must be getting serious, he said, offering a weak smile. That Clara acknowledged, speaking carefully, knowing that the situation was very delicate. Drake is a good man. Her son nodded, but didn't speak. Feeling the need to explain herself further, Clara said, he's smart, kind, and funny. You'll see it, too, once you get to know him better. He seems like a good guy, Tommy added, his expression unreadable. He is, Clara agreed, but then she felt like she was selling Drake short. Like even if she sat here for an hour, she wouldn't be able to tell Tommy about all the ways he had changed her life. How before the race car driver had arrived, her tomorrows were something to dread rather than days to look forward to. I haven't felt this way in a long time, she finally explained. Since Dad died? Tommy's words silenced her. Tears filled Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had already made her peace with Joe, so deep in her heart she knew that he would have understood her feelings for Drake. It was time to face the future and quit clinging so tenaciously to the past. Now she had to convince Tommy. No one will ever replace your father, she began. He will always be part of both our lives. Nothing can ever change that. Clara paused. But somehow, unexpectedly, I found love again. Just when I was ready to give up all hope, Drake appeared. And while we can never make up what we have lost, not completely, he can be the start to something new. The only thing I ask for you is that you don't turn your back on him. Give him a chance. That's all. Tommy turned to look out the window. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he nodded his head. I'll try, he said. It was then, as she was flooded with feelings of relief, that Clara's attention was drawn to a figure hurrying down the sidewalk towards them. It took Clara a moment to realize that it was Amos. The mechanic hobbled with a noticeable limp, his clothes drenched in sweat and his face as white as bone. He clutched a large bag to his chest, its straps swinging with every step. Passing in front of the truck, his eyes were focused straight ahead. He never spared them so much as a glance. Isn't that? Tommy remarked. Clara didn't answer. She could only watch Amos go, too stunned to call out his name or honk the horn. The next thing she knew, the mechanic threw the bag in the back of the Plymouth, fired up the car's powerful engine, and disappeared in a cloud of burnt rubber. What was all that about? Tommy asked. In answer, Clara started the pickup. Whatever was going to happen next would happen fast. Drake leaned against the wall, down the hall, and around the corner from the lobby, cursing under his breath. He had paid a price for running. The bullet had punctured his biceps, tearing through his skin as easily as his shirt. Blood sprayed the fabric and dripped onto the floor. Drake knew that it couldn't have been much worse. A couple inches to the right, and it would probably have taken his last breath. But as bad as the wound hurt, he had a bigger problem. The door at the end of the hallway, the one he had planned on using to make his escape, was locked tight. Come on, the thin man shouted, after Drake before he gets away. Oh my gosh. Now they're trying to get after Drake. Drake is something else. After Amos. Amos is something else, guys. He is something else. Oh, thank you, Sugar. Delia is here. Good morning, my love. Good morning, family. How you doing? Isagi, how you doing? It's a pleasure seeing you, my love. Thank you so much for stopping by. And here is, I got my right hip with me and my left hip just rolled in. Morning, Card. What's up? How are you doing, Sugar? Good to see y'all. Thank you all for coming into the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Let's move on. Come on, the thin man shouted after McCoy before he gets away. Time was running out. Drake knew that he had only two choices. He could either bust the door down or stand his ground and fight. But the odds of surviving against the three men, especially when they were armed, were slim to none. Think! Damn it! Think! But then his salvation came from an unexpected source. The hell with the driver, the leader barked. I don't give a damn about him. I want Barstow. But what about move? I said move. The order was followed by the pounding of footsteps. Drake listened closely, his breath caught in his throat. As soon as he heard the slamming of the car doors, he was off and running. Outside, Drake found Clara behind the wheel of the pickup. She slid over as he got in, wincing in pain as he brushed his arm against the door. What happened? She asked, staring at the blood-soaked shirt. Her voice panicked. Have you been shot? In answer, Drake threw the truck into gear and took off after the cars. He concentrated on working the stick, the clutch, and the accelerator as smoothly as he could, but it still felt as if he was taking forever to increase their speed. Why are they after Amos? Clara asked. I still don't really know, Drake answered, racing down Main Street. Up ahead, He could just make out a Cadillac speeding towards the edge of town. They claimed he had stolen something from them. What? They didn't say, but they seemed to think I was in on it. We saw them, Tommy said. Your friend, the one those guys were shooting at. He walked right past us on the way to your car. He was limping like he had been hurt in the leg, Clara added. He was carrying a big duffel bag with him, but we were both so... Amos was what? Drake interrupted, his heart suddenly racing faster than the pickup truck. Hey, now he's learning that Amos has his bag with his life savings in it. Oh, I can imagine Drake is now pissed. Boy, let us continue, see what's going on. Limping, she repeated. Not that. What did you say he had with him? A big bag? Drake felt as if he had been slugged in the gut. The bag was his. All the money he had saved over the years was in it. Thousands of dollars. Amos was stealing from him, too. Amos pointed the Plymouth out of town and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. He drove recklessly, drifting across the center line before overcorrecting, and then took even the gentlest of corners, just enough to make the tires squeal. His poor driving made sense given how bad he felt, his hands slick with sweat, trembling on the steering wheel. His guts ached, like they had been tied in knots. He blinked constantly, his eyes betraying him as the road wiggled like a worm on a fish line. Come on, he said to himself. Keep it together. In the end, the only thing that mattered was that he had the money. Somewhere deep inside, Amos knew it was wrong to steal it like that. But what choice did he have? Morphine wasn't free. Sweetwoods and his men were right behind him. Without enough cash in his pocket, he was as good as dead. Though he hated to have done Drake that way, in his withdrawal-addled mind, he had already begun to rationalize his actions, to convince himself that his friend would understand, even that he was running away with Drake's blessings. That's how addicts think. They can rationalize every action, every single action they commit, every act, every offense they commit. They can rationalize it because they have good reason. Oh, my withdrawals, I was going to shake to death. The sweats, I couldn't take it anymore. So I had to do this. Always. And those of us who work in the healthcare field, we come across them sometimes. Let us continue. I'd make it up to him someday. He'd laugh about it. Nervously, Amos looked in the rearview mirror. He had long since zoomed out of Sunset and was now barreling along a straightaway, the river out the passenger's side window. As he watched, he noticed something drawing steadily closer. After blinking a couple of times, the mechanic raised his hand to wipe sweat from his eyes and nearly drove off the road. But what he saw never changed. Tense seconds later, he understood that it was a car driving at high speed, kicking up a huge plume of dust in its wake. Just like that, all his hopes vanished. Oh, is the book missing a page? Oh, there we go. Sweetwoods wasn't about to let him get away easy. There he is, Jesse shouted, so excited that he reached out to point his finger, pressing against the Cadillac's windshield. Sweet smiled. He leaned forward over the front seat between the two men, his eyes narrowed, locked on the fleeing Plymouth. Son of a bitch didn't get far, did he? Jay continued. As fast as we are going to catch him real quick. Ever since they rocketed away from the hotel, Sweet had been impressed with Malcolm's driving. He was strong and steady, his big hands clenching the steering wheel like a vice, and had quickly brought them to the Cadillac's top speed. The man knew how to negotiate turns by taking his foot off the gas and occasionally tapping the brakes. Even as Sweet watched, the distance between the two cars continued to shrink. Barstow might have been a whiz under the hood, but behind the wheel, Sweet would bet on his last dollar that he could not get away. Too bad about McCoy getting away, Jesse said, too worked up to keep his gums from flapping. Barstow first, Sweet replied, then we'll see about his driver. There was a part of Sweet that wondered if Drake McCoy hadn't been telling the truth when he said he didn't know that what Barstow had stolen. Over the years, Sweet had heard more than his share of lies, often while holding a gun, and there was usually something that gave the person away. Eyes that couldn't stay in one place for long, a nervous twitch, or a shirt drenched in sweat. McCoy had shown none of these signs. Regardless, the driver was a loose end. Sweet had seen the splatter of blood on the hallway. McCoy had been wounded. It would be a simple matter to go back and put another bullet between his eyes. He had put one into the old woman who had been behind the counter too while he was at it. OMG. The road rose sharply over a hill, but then, after an equally steep descent, curved hard to the left. As fast as Malcolm was driving, there wasn't time to slow as he tried to negotiate the turn, and the rear end started to fishtail. A second later, one of the rear wheels skidded onto the shoulder. Rocks and loose dirt sprayed as the wheels spun. In that instant, a number of unfortunate possibilities loomed. They might flip, continue sliding down into the ditch, or even blow a tire. But amazingly, Malcolm kept them steady. Before Jesse could shout in fear, they were back on the road and again racing forward, the engine growling loudly as it tried to go as fast as the driver demanded. Jesus Christ Almighty! Jesse swore. That was close. Sweet ignored him. Stay on him, he said. Stay on him. He ordered Malcolm. Catch up and knock his ass off the road. Malcolm did as he was told, closing the gap until Sweet could see Barstow's eyes watching them in the rearview mirror. As if to formally announce their presence, Malcolm drove the Cadillac into the rear of the Plymouth, giving it a solid bump. Hey, hey, hey now, Jesse worried. Be careful. We don't wanna. Quit your bitching, Sweet shouted, grabbing Malcolm's shoulders. Wherever he goes, you follow. Drive over him if you have to. This was going to end right here, right now. Clara watched Drake push the pickup as fast as its old engine could take them. The truck complained loudly, occasionally sputtering as its pistons misfire. Only a couple of days earlier, he had wanted to drive it, curious about what the truck could do. Had even called it a classic, but now Drake's earlier amusement was gone, replaced by raw frustration. Even though they raced out of Sunset, in comparison to the other two cars, it felt as if they were crawling. The truck simply wasn't fast enough. Come on, damn you, Drake complained, striking his palm against the steering wheel. We are never going to catch up with them like this. Clara put her hand on his knee. It's all right, she said, recognizing the inevitable. Amos and his pursuers were going to get away. No, it isn't, he argued. Drake looked at her, his expression a mix of anger and worry. Amos, Amos, he began, slowly, as if he couldn't find the words. He stole all my money. Clara was stunned. But how? It was in the bag he was carrying. My bag, he explained. It's most everything I've saved. There's a bit more in the bank in Illinois, but that's all I've got. Drake didn't finish, but Clara knew what remained unspoken. The money in his duffel bag was the future they had been both counting on. It was how they were going to keep Eddie from following through on the threat to take away her house. All of their hopes and dreams were in danger. They are taking Baker's Road out of town, Tommy suddenly said. So, Clara asked. It runs west along the river for a couple of miles, but then loops back towards town just before you reach Bill Shelton's farm. Her son explained. If we run right after Walt Cornelius' place, the back roads will lead us right to them. We might even reach the highway ahead of them. Where's the turn? Drake asked. Tommy showed him, and the pickup roared around the corner, spraying gravels. Clara bounced on the seat as her son directed Drake past recently plowed fields, over rickety bridges, and through dense woods. As they crested a hill, the valley opened beneath them, and her eyes scanned the length of the road that threaded through it. Her heart beat faster when she saw two cars headed their way. There they are, Clara shouted as she pointed. We are not going to get there in time, Tommy said with a frown. They're moving too fast. We are sure as hell going to try, Drake said as he floored the accelerator. Even as they rocketed down the hill, the truck's engine straining hard, Clara knew that Tommy was right. By the time they reached the highway, both cars would have already gone past. They were too late. Welcome into the live, guys. Thank you all so much for coming this morning. OMG, that was exhilarating. Just reading that part. They get me all nervous that I am in sunset myself and racing in one of them cars as well. OMG, I hope you all are enjoying the reading, guys. Carter, how are you doing? Delia, how are you doing? Tings, how are you doing? Everybody else in the chat, how is everybody doing? Eat Sogi, and the silent listeners as well. How is everybody doing? Hope everybody's having a fantastic morning. Let us continue. Hold on. Hold on a second here, guys. Okay, it was too late. It would take a miracle to keep them from getting away. Sweat dripped into Amos's eyes, but he was so focused on the other car that he didn't bother to wipe it away. Icy chills rippled across his skin, making him feel nauseous. His vision swam and his ears rang. He felt as if he was trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. Once again, Sweetwoods rammed his car. The jolt was jarring, hard enough to make his teeth chatter. This time, it caused the Plymouth to swerve wildly, forcing him to wrestle it back under control. Leave me alone, he pleaded. Amos glanced over his shoulder at Drake's bag in the back seat. If he could just get away, if he could just find someone or somewhere to buy more morphine, if he could rent a room, get a fix, sleep for a few days, everything would be all right. He was sure of it. Because he was distracted, thinking about the drugs and the money he had stolen, and bracing himself for another hit from the Cadillac, Amos wasn't paying attention to the road. He was driving fast, the Plymouth speedometer buried. So when the sudden sharp turn arrived, he hadn't seen it coming. Even as Drake struggled to keep the pickup truck on the dirt road, he kept glancing at the two speeding cars. He could see that the Plymouth was going too fast as it approached the curve, the Cadillac right on its tail. He felt the sudden urge to cry out, to shout a warning to Amos, but it would have been futile. He was helpless to do anything but watch. What happened next felt as if it occurred in slow motion. Amos jammed down hard on the Plymouth's brakes as it suddenly realized he was in grave danger. Smoke billowed off the pavement as the tires screamed, but it wasn't enough. The car slid to the right, out of control, before flying off the road and over a steep incline. Incredibly, the Cadillac followed. Its driver had been too close, too intent on catching his quarry, and he hadn't realized he was being blinded. Oh my God, Clara shouted. In his many years racing cars, Drake had seen plenty of crashes, but this one was the worst. The Plymouth sailed through the air, landing on its undercarriage hard enough to blow out a couple of tires before bouncing towards a corps of trees. It rammed nose first into a thick elm, its front end crumbling as if it was made of paper. Metal and glass flew everywhere. A heartbeat later, the Cadillac rammed it from behind, flipping over the Plymouth's roof to smash into the same tree. After all their furious racing, whipping down the back country roads, both cars fell silent and still. Drake skipped to a skidded to a stop at the bottom of the hill, a couple hundred feet from the crash. His heart felt like it was going to pound out of his chest. Hey, Jojo, what's up? Good to see you, my love. I got your message this morning. We'll talk about it later. Stay here, he shouted at Clara and Tommy before leaping out and running towards the wreck. He had gone only a couple of steps before a fire erupted to life. Drake had no idea which of the car's gas tanks had erupted, though it hardly mattered. In seconds, the flames grew, hungry, angry, spreading until both vehicles were burning, sending black, acrid smoke billowing skyward. Drake had to shield his face, the intense heat like a wall. He peered into the fire, searching the cars for something, movement, a cry for help, but there was nothing. Amos! Amos! He shouted at the top of his lungs, but he knew it was pointless. His friend was dead. No one could have survived that crash. But then, just as he was about to give up hope, Drake saw the tall... Okay, I almost read ahead of myself right there, guys. Just then, just as he was about to give up hope, Drake saw the tall grass 30 feet from the wreckage begin to move. Without any consideration of his own safety, he ran to it, silently praying that he was wrong, that Amos had miraculously survived. Sure enough, someone was trying to crawl away, both battered and bloodied, his clothes singled as well as torn. I'm here, Amos, Drake shouted. Have got you. However, when he turned the wounded man over, Drake discovered that it wasn't the mechanic after all. It was the silent, dangerous-looking thug from the hotel. The man's mouth moved, but no words came out. In his eyes, Drake saw no trace of viciousness, only confusion and fear. Even though the stranger threatened to do him and Amos harm, Drake grabbed his arms and dragged him away from the fire. By the time he laid the thug down, the man was unconscious. A quick check revealed that he was still alive. Drake wiped his brow and stared at the blaze. Amos was dead. The Plymouth was wrecked. Everything he had spent years saving, almost all his money, was now nothing but ash. He glanced at the truck. Clara and Tommy stood beside it, mesmerized by the fire. What was he going to tell her? Without his money, how were they going to build a future together? What hope did they have to getting rid of Eddie now? Try as he might, Drake couldn't come up with a single answer. Clara shivered in the wind, rubbing her hands on her bare arms, but she had no desire to get back in the truck. Dusk was fast approaching, the sun slowly setting for the night. Smoke still drifted lazily across the sky, the sharp smell burning her nose. The fire department had long since come and gone, leaving behind two charred wreckages that had once been cars. The only survivor of the crash had been rushed to town in an ambulance. She didn't know what would happen to the remains of Amos and the other men. Right then, she couldn't bring herself to care. All that mattered was Drake. He stood with Sheriff Oglesby talking about the crash. Clara was too far away to hear what they were saying, but she guessed what Drake was telling the lawman was the truth, that he didn't know why the men had been after Amos. Not exactly, only that the mechanic had been accused of stealing something. Drake's expression was calm. He was nodding a lot, but Clara expected that he was torn up on the inside. Even if Amos had robbed him of his money, they had spent years together, traveling from place to place under the Plymouth hood, building a friendship as close as family. She worried how he would react to such a huge loss. Clara imagined that the worst part was that Drake would never have the chance to talk to Amos about his betrayal. He would die a thief. And he took the money with him when he went. Earlier, Clara had watched Drake walk the tall grass around the wreck, hoping that his bag had been ejected as the survivor had, but he had come up empty, left with nothing but ash. She couldn't help but think of Eddie. How could they fend him off now? If the banker went through with its threat, then in addition to losing the Plymouth, Amos, and all of Drake's money, her home would be taken away. Once she had considered surrendering to Eddie's demands. Now her love for Drake made it impossible. But what else could they do? Pennies for her thoughts. Clara jumped at the sound of Tommy's voice. Winsome, what's up? How are you doing? Clara jumped at the sound of Tommy's voice. She had been so preoccupied that she hadn't heard him approach. He hadn't said much since the crash, wandering up and down the ditches, watching from the distance. She shook her head. I'm just tired, she answered, then nodded towards the wrecked cars. It's been a long day. Tommy was silent for a bit, kicking rocks at his feet. I've been thinking about something, he finally said. What was in Drake's bag? Must have been important, as mad as he was that his friend took it. Clara considered lying, but when she saw the way her son was looking at her, when she thought about their recent reconciliation, she couldn't. Isn't his life in as much trouble as mine? She took a deep breath. There's something you should know, she began. By the time she had finished, Clara had told Tommy everything. She explained that Drake had intended to help them, but that plan was now in jeopardy. It isn't fair, Tommy said angrily. You will still find out that plenty in life isn't, Clara answered. Sometimes there isn't anything you can do about it. But he's blackmailing you. Eddie doesn't see it that way, she explained. He's in love with me and means to have me whether I want to be his wife or not. Tommy balled his fist in anger. Clara was reminded of Joe. He would often rail away against things he found unjust, furious at a newspaper article or a radio program. Like father, like son, she supposed, but just like them. When Joe complained about where they had been, Winsome, how are you doing? I'm so happy to see you as always, my love. Good to see you. I hope you all are enjoying the reading as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you. We are pretty close to the end of this book, and I am indeed fascinated by it. We're not going to be finishing it today, but we'll definitely finish it tomorrow. Let us continue. Tommy balled his fist in anger. Clara was reminded of Joe. He would often rail away against things he found unjust, furious at a newspaper article or a radio program. Like father, like son, she supposed. But just like then, when Joe complained about there not being enough jobs to go around, the price of a pound of flour, or even about Hitler's march from Czechoslovakia, or Hitler's march into Czechoslovakia, there was nothing that could be done. They were helpless. I've got an idea. Clara turned to look at Tommy. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. There's nothing we can do now, she said. The money is gone. Her son shook his head. If my idea works, we wouldn't need it. From the look in Tommy's eyes, Clara could see he believed what he was saying. It's too late. We don't have... Just hear me out. And then decide, Tommy interrupted, his excitement showing. Besides, what do we have to lose? Clara knew the answer. Nothing. Amos's thievery and death had placed their backs against the wall. At this point, any idea, no matter odd or impractical, should be considered. After all, they needed a miracle. All right, she said, let's go talk to Drake. Natals! OMG! My sister Natals is in the house. How are you doing, sugar? So good to see you. Thank you so much for coming, my dear. Oh my gosh, guys. Do you all believe that we are on to chapter 27 and it's just about the last chapter? We may as well finish this book today. We may as well finish this book today. Oh my God. I think I got to open up. I don't know. The room just seems dark. All right. So welcome, guys. I think we're going to just finish up. We have read only one chapter. That one chapter took us 35 minutes. Darn, it was long. I was at me biting my tongue. But anywho, we are going to continue. Let us continue. And enough family members are here for us to continue, right, guys? We're on now to chapter 27. Eddie stood in front of the large picture window and frowned. It looked miserable outside. The sky full of clouds, the color of dishwater. This time of year depressed him. It was always raining, and the mornings were cold enough to hint at the summer to come. Occasionally, he fantasized about moving someplace warm, somewhere like Florida, though he knew he would never leave Sunset. This was his home, where he and Clara would raise their family. He was lost in those thoughts, drinking a cup of coffee, when the telephone rang. Surprised, he looked at the clock. It wasn't even 8. Who could be calling at such an hour? Hello? He asked tentatively. We need to talk immediately. Eddie recognized the voice on the other end of the line. It was Drake McCoy. His hand tightened on the receiver. What can I do for you? He said. Cut the crap, McCoy replied. You know why I'm calling. You'd come to a decision. There was a moment of silence. Eddie is really persistent, guys, don't you think? Eddie is one persistent man. I think something is wrong with him. But then again, they say that he's socially awkward. So maybe he even have some developmental issues because he's so persistent. OMG. You have come to a decision. There was a moment of silence. I have, the race car driver answered, but that all depends on if your offer still stands. It does, the same as before. That's not good enough anymore. I want double. Eddie nodded to himself. Ever since the two men had met, he had been considering this possibility. I already tried to give it to you. Not double that, McCoy said. Twice the second amount. 4 times the original offer. 4 times the original offer, he blurted. If that's too much. Eddie swallowed hard. He wasn't against paying such a hefty amount. He would have given most everything he owned to have Clara, but he was surprised that the driver was being so greedy. McCoy had flaunted his principles when they first met. Eddie wondered if something had happened with Clara to change his mind. All right, he eventually agreed. Come down to the bank this afternoon, and I'll give you your money. Not there, Eddie frowned. Why not? Guys, I'm wondering, I don't trust Eddie, number one. And I'm wondering if by Drake upping the amount that he wants Eddie to pay him, if Eddie not trusting Drake might lead him to want to take Drake's life. Until now, I haven't heard them say what they have done with Drake's shattered arm. Remember that Sweet Woods had shot Drake in the arm, and I still haven't heard them say a word about what happened with that arm. He's moving around and using that arm as if nothing happened. But anyway, we are going to continue. I just hope that Eddie's not planning to harm Drake, like giving him the money and then harm him and taking back the money. And then he would have Clara because Drake would be out of the picture. All right, let's continue. Not there. Eddie frowned. Why not? Because Clara is working today, and even though I don't expect you to understand, I don't want to hurt her anyway more than necessary. She doesn't need to know what's happening until I'm long gone. While Eddie would have While Eddie would have enjoyed the triumphant feeling of watching Clara's face collapse as the race car driver walked out of her life forever, a part of him admired McCoy for wanting to avoid a scene. If not the bank, then where? The hotel? I'll be in the parlor at noon. But Eddie couldn't say anything else. The phone line was dead. Picking up his coffee, he took a drink, but then spat it back right out. While he while he had been talking to McCoy, he had gone cold. It had gone cold. But rather than refill it from the pot, Eddie chose something stronger, something fit for a celebration. With a glass of bourbon, he went down to the window. Suddenly, things didn't seem so gloomy. By the time night came, nothing would stand in the way of his and Clara's life. It would She would be his and his forever and always. Oh my God, poor Eddie. When Drake hung up the phone, Clara began to breathe again. The whole time she had been in the kitchen listening to his conversation with Eddie, her heart had raced. Do you think this is going to work? She asked. Drake nodded. I do, he answered, though she wondered if he wasn't trying to convince himself as much as her. Tommy's plan had surprised them both with its ingenuity. Listening to him as he spelt it all out, Clara had wondered if spending so much time with a delinquent like Naomi had rubbed off on him. After that, Drake had made suggestions that they had stayed up most of the night finalizing. Oh my God, so there goes another plot. None of them had slept more than about 2 hours. But now, with a phone call, the ball had started rolling. What if something goes wrong? Clara pressed, unable to stop agonizing over it. What if he realizes we are up to something? OMG. It doesn't matter, Drake answered. Even if Eddie manages to sniff out our plan, then we're back where we started, stuck between a rock and a hard place. Tom is right about one thing. We don't have anything to lose. Gently, he took her hand. Just stick to what we talked about, and it will all work out. He smiled. Trust me. Clara wrapped her arms around Drake's waist and held on tight. She pressed her head on his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. Touching him like this, it was hard to believe all they had been through. I'm sorry about Amos, she told him. Ever since the crash, Drake hadn't said a word about his friend, although it had been obvious he had been thinking about the mechanic, wondering what had gone so wrong. All morning his attention had wandered, no doubt replaying over and over again what they had witnessed. After they had decided on their plan to deal with Eddie, Drake had gone out on the porch alone and sat on the steps, staring up at the cloudy skies. Clara imagined he was remembering races they had run, conversations shared down country roads, laughs over bears. She had watched from the window but hadn't joined him, and eventually he had come back inside. Me too, she said. But now isn't the time for mourning. Drake tipped her chin up. Drake tipped her chin up until she was looking in his eyes. What matters is you. Clara rose on her tippy toes to kiss him tenderly, their lips barely brushing. But I'm sorry, guys. They could have a more passionate celebration later. You need to get ready for work, he told her. She shook her head. I can't believe I have to spend the morning with Eddie, acting like I have no idea what's going on. Guys, I don't know about you all, but I am anxious to hear what their plan is. There's always a plot going on in this story, always a plot. It's all part of the plan, Drake said. Besides, I need to get going. I have things to take care of before the meeting at the hotel. Can I come with you? Both of them turned to see Tommy leaning against the doorway. There had been a time when Clara would have been horrified if her son found her standing in a man's arms, but not now. With all they had talked about, she knew Tommy understood what they could lose as well as what they wished to gain. Drake nodded. Sure, he said. I'd like that. Watching them back Watching them back the truck down the driveway, Clara thought that no matter what, one way or the other, things were about to change forever. Clara stood on the porch, finishing a cup of coffee. A steady rain had begun to fall, drumming on the roof above her head. In the distance, a deep roll of thunder rumbled. The weather matched her mood. After Drake and Tommy left, she had taken a shower, gotten dressed, put on a touch of makeup, and tried to ready herself to go to the bank. She still couldn't believe she was going to stand at her teller window, smile at customers, and pretend that she didn't know what was about to happen. She knew Drake was right, understood that it was part of their plan, but it made her sick to her stomach nevertheless. But she would go through with it for all their sakes. Behind her, Clara heard a floorboard creak. Moments later, her mother appeared at the door. Christine had sat with them for most of the night, discussing how to deal with Eddie. She hadn't said much, but when their spirits lagged, especially Clara's, Christine had offered encouragement. Worry never got anyone anywhere, she said. Besides, Eddie Fuller has always been an odd duck, even when he was a boy. Whatever bad comes from it, however he suffers, he deserves whatever he gets. Did you sleep? Clara asked. Her mother nodded. A little, she said, but then yawned. From the look on her face, I reckon I got more than you. Clara smiled weakly. I'm just so nervous. I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. Drake tells me not to worry, but I just can't help it. That's understandable, Christine said. Imagine what could happen if Eddie finds out what we are up to. Imagine that, guys. Eddie finds out what they are up to. She loses her job. Then Eddie takes the house. Drake has no money. Then Eddie uses his money to pay somebody to off them. Oh, so many things could happen. He wouldn't rest until all of our things were out on the street. We'd be ruined. But Eddie doesn't want that. Her mother disagreed. All he wants is you, and he'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. His love will blind him. You sound like you think this will work. I do, Christine said. Listen, she's taking advice from Christine. Remember, Christine has dementia. So to Christine, it looks like it's going to work. But I'm surprised that Clara is going ahead with whatever this plan is. I'm surprised that she's going along. But let's continue. I do, Christine said, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulder. But even if it doesn't, you and I have been through worse. Both of us lost our husbands. We raised our children largely on our own. We worked and scripted up to put food on the table. Even if we lose the house, we land on our feet. Listening to her mother inspired Clara. She remembered the day standing on this very porch when she had been told of Joe's death. Overwhelmed with grief, she had been unable to imagine a future without her husband, but she had still managed to build one. Even if Eddie's vindictiveness put her on put her on the street, she would still have Tommy and her mother. She would still have Drake. Together, they would build a new future, no matter what it took. Thanks, Mom, she said. You have made me feel better. I'm glad, Christine answered. Now get on down to the bank. It's time for you to get that rotten son of a gun off for good. Are you planning on marrying my mother? Drake tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Ever since he and Tommy had left the house, they had been busy. First, they had gone to a filling station. If Eddie had if Eddie made a run for it, Drake wanted to make sure he had plenty of gas. After that, they went to the hotel and packed up the rest of his and Amos's belongings. A quick search of his dead friend's belongings revealed no clues to explain his thievery. Down in the lobby, Edna Gilbert offered her condolences for Amos, but was thankful that the men who had threatened her had met the same fate. When Drake told her that he and Eddie would be using her parlor that afternoon, her good humor vanished. After that, he had telephoned his bank in Illinois, wanting to know exactly how much money he had left. It wasn't much, but it would get them by for a while if their gambit failed. I don't know, guys, but I'm a little anxious. I want to know what in the world they are planning, what kind of gambit they're planning against Eddie. Through it all, Tommy had been quiet, as if something was weighing on his mind. Now Drake knew what it had been. Someday, he answered, if she'll have me. He paused. Is this why you wanted to come along? To ask me that? Partly, Tommy admitted. Do you have a problem? Do you have a problem with your mother and I being together? Clara's son shook his head. No, I don't. I see how she looks at you, and how even when all this craziness is going on, you can still make her smile. I love her, Drake explained, knowing with all his heart that it was true. When we met, I knew she was the woman I'd been looking for all my life. But I've worried you wouldn't be happy about it, he said, remembering their first encounter and how it had ended. I'm not trying to be your father. Tommy stared out the window, watching rainwater trickle down the glass. I don't have any memories of him, he said. I was so young when he died that I can't remember much. I'm not sure what you'd be replacing. I've spent more than 20 years trying to forget my old man. Have you? Tommy asked. Why? Because we fought like cats and dogs, Drake explained. Nothing I did was ever good enough. So the first chance I got, I hit the road and never looked back. So even I wanted to take your father's place. I'm not sure I'd know how. I suppose I'd have an idea what not to do, but what wouldn't make me? That wouldn't make me much of a parent. Chef is in the place. Ready for breakfast. Chef, what's up? How are you doing, my love? So good to see you as always. Thank you so much for stopping by. What I'm hoping, he said, looking at Tommy, is that we can be friends. The boy was silent for a while, as if he was considering the offer, and then he slowly nodded. I think we can do that. That's good to hear. Does this mean you'll teach me how to drive really fast? Now Tommy is interested in driving. Okay, let's move on. That's good to hear. Does that mean you teach me how to drive really fast? Drake laughed loudly. We are going to need to get a new car first. Noticing Tommy's disappointment, he added, who knows? Maybe with some tinkering under the hood, this old truck might have a few good runs left in her. Don't hold your breath though, Tommy joked. This time they both laughed. Turning down the street on which Clara and her family lived, Drake looked at the house through the wiping windshield wipers. If he made a mistake, if he underestimated Eddie, it could all be lost. OMG. Make sure that bastard gets what's coming to him, Tommy said, as if he had read Drake's mind. For him, for Clara, for all of them, he was betting on it. Eddie walked into the Sunset Hotel with a spring in his steps. As usual, Edna Gilbert stood behind the front desk. When she saw him, she opened her mouth to say something, but Eddie strode right past her and into the parlor without a word. Today, he wasn't in the mood for chit-chat. He had far more important matters to attend to. Drake McCoy sat at the table next to Eddie. Without waiting for an invitation, Eddie took the seat opposite him. I must say, he began, unbuttoning his vest, his stomach having grown a bit larger since his father's death. I admire you not wanting Clara to see this. The race car driver frowned. Like I told you on the phone, he said, I have no interest in being cruel. Just getting richer, Eddie suggested. McCoy shrugged. She seemed quite happy at the bank, smiling at her customers, going about her day like any other. Oddly enough, it had been Eddie who had struggled to stay focused at work, sitting at his desk, pretending to sort through papers. He kept going to his door to steal glances at her, daydreaming about the future they would have together. With McCoy headed out of town, his pockets stuffed with cash, there was nothing left to keep them apart. Once Clara had caught him looking at her, quickly, her gaze had darted away, her discomfort obvious, which, which hurt Eddie deeply. Her reaction strengthened his conviction to change her mind, to make her look upon him longingly, with love in her eyes. Oh my God, poor Eddie. Did you bring the money? McCoy asked. Eddie nodded. He pulled another check from the inside pocket of his coat and pushed it across the table. $8,000. $8,000. But the funny thing I'm thinking, guys, is giving Drake $8,000 in a check, but he could very well not pay out that $8,000. All right, Trev, don't get ahead of yourself. Just read the book. McCoy picked up the check and looked at it. Eddie had expected the man to smile, pleased with the numbers. Instead, the race car driver frowned, as if something offended him. Then he ripped the check in half. Eddie was so dumbfounded that he rose out of his chair. What? What do you think you are doing? It's not enough, the man answered matter of factly. But, but this is what we agreed to. You said so just this morning. This morning you said so. McCoy shook his head. I changed my mind. Now I want 12,000. Eddie couldn't believe what he was hearing. His heart raced, his blood pressure rose, and he breathed so hard his nostrils flared. This is outrageous, he shouted in a voice that hardly sounded like his own. Call it whatever you want, Drake answered, his face impassive, his voice sounding as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. If it's too much, then I suppose I can stick around town a while longer. Folks here are real friendly. Inside, Eddie raged. He hadn't bargained on McCoy proving to be so greedy. Still, he was rich. He was wealthy enough to afford what the bastard was asking. To Eddie, Clara Sinclair was worth every penny. Whatever he had to spend to make her his, it was a price worth paying. In the end, it was only money. All right, Eddie grumbled reluctantly. $12,000 it is. He sat back down, pulled out his checkbook, and started to write out the new amount. He was halfway done when McCoy interrupted him. I've got a question, he said. Eddie's hand came up to an abrupt halt, his pen making an unintended mark on the paper. Was McCoy going to make another demand? What is it? He asked curtly. After you had paid me to go away, what will you do if Clara refuses to become your wife? What if she still rejects you? Eddie shook his head. This was nonsense. She won't. But what if she does? The driver pressed. Clara's smart enough not to make such a mistake. McCoy chuckled. I don't think you know her as well as you think you do. Don't tell me you are having second thoughts, Eddie said. The racer shook his head. Then why do you want to Then what do you want to know so badly? I'm curious. Eddie licked his lips. If Clara was foolish enough to refuse what I'm offering, then I'd take away everything that matters to her. How? How? Eddie echoed. warming to his explanation. Just how hard do you think it would be for me to go into the bank's records and make it appear as if Clara was behind on her house payments? You have already told me this, the driver said. What happens then? Then I'll own her house, and Clara will be out on the street, along with her son, her mother, and everything that she owns. What Eddie left unsaid was that he hoped it wouldn't come to that. He wanted Clara, not her house. Threatening to take it was simply a means to an end. Regardless, he'd do it if she kept rejecting him. Though it would hurt him deeply, it would ruin her life. He wasn't a man to be trifled with. The amazing M&G, how are you doing, my love? Isn't that illegal? McCoy asked. Of course it is, Eddie snapped, growing annoyed at all the questions. Truth is, Clara has never once been late on a payment. But so what? I can change that, turn it upside down, and no one will doubt me for a second. Because you are so important, huh? That's right. Banks are important, and the men who run them are powerful. He continued, thinking about all the times his father had failed to flaunt his authority, preaching to his son that he wasn't above the community. What complete hogwash. Clara can claim that she's paid up until she's blue in the face, but it won't do her any good. And that's why she's going to do exactly as I say. With that, Eddie returned to writing out the check. You're a real son of a bitch, aren't you? Once again, he stopped writing. McCoy's voice had been menacing, his words packed in accusations. Eddie looked up. The other man's face was twisted into a scowl. Oh, if he was itching for a fight. Shockingly, so was Eddie. What did you call me? He demanded. You heard me, McCoy answered. I've spent an awful lot of years driving from town to town, most of them a lot like Sunset. And during that time, I've met all kinds of people. Some were rich, others were poor, some were educated, others were not. But I have never met such a spineless, manipulative bastard like you. The driver paused, letting a smile slowly spread across his face. As long as I live, I'm going to be glad I played a part in bringing your life crashing down around your head. But remember this, not everything is for sale. Eddie stood quickly, so violently that his chair toppled over onto the floor. What? What is this? He shouted. What are you talking about? Turn around and find out. Incredulously confused and more than a little frightened, Eddie spun on his heel just as two people stepped into the parlor. He suddenly felt ill. Standing before him was Clara. Next to her was Sheriff Oglesby. Clara couldn't believe what she had heard. She and the sheriff had been standing outside the parlor, listening to Eddie and Drake's conversation. Several times she had wanted to rush into the room to scream her outrage at Eddie, but every time she had managed to fight the urge, remembering what Drake had told her, until Eddie admitted to blackmailing her, until he acknowledged that he knew what he was doing was illegal. She couldn't show herself. But it had been hard to hold back. It hadn't been much easier at the bank. All morning she had struggled to act as if nothing was wrong, like it was just another day. The worst part had been catching Eddie staring at her with his goofy grin. She didn't want to imagine what disturbed fantasies were rolling around in his puck of a head. As the clock neared noon, Eddie had Eddie had left for his meeting with Drake. Clara had followed, dodging rain puddles as she hurried down the back streets leading to the hotel. Sheriff Oglesby was waiting at the rear entrance. Drake had informed the lawman of their plans that morning. Edna Gilbert let them inside. Making their way to the parlor, they listened to Eddie incriminate himself. So guys, that was the plan. The plan was to have Eddie incriminate himself by saying exactly what he was planning to do to Clara so the sheriff could hear him, and that would be his undoing. Now she no longer needed to keep quiet. How dare you? Clara shouted, her voice quivering with fury. She moved quickly, closing the distance between them, and slapped Teddy hard across his face. In the small room, the blow sounded like a gunshot. Eddie's eyes went as wide as saucers, not from pain, but from shock. Clara waited. Before he could lie, Clara hit him again. She reared back a third time, but the sheriff grabbed her wrist. Hold on, the sheriff said. No one's going to disagree that he had the first two coming, but that's enough for now. I don't know what you think you heard, Eddie argued, pressing his palm against his rapidly reddening cheek. But I but I assure you I wouldn't. Stow it, Eddie, Sheriff Oglesby cut him off. We have been standing outside the whole time. I heard every word loud and clear. Then you misunderstood. I didn't mean that. Let's you and I go down to the office and we'll have a talk about it, the lawman continued. I'm particularly interested in one word, blackmail. When they had come up with their plan, the intention wasn't to put Eddie behind bars, but rather to render him impotent. Tommy had made the analogy that the banker's threat was like a loaded gun pointed straight at their heads. They needed to remove the bullets. But if Eddie ended up falling hard, if he went to jail, lost the bank and all his wealth, his life ruined, then so be it. Suddenly, Eddie seemed to realize all he stood to lose. His panicked eyes found Clara. I wouldn't have gone through with it, he soared. I love you. I always will. I've always loved you. Clara stared hard at him. She remembered all the times he had approached her at her teller's window, making pathetic commands, ignoring how she rejected him. She thought back to their talk in his office when he had proposed marriage and then threatened her with losing her home if she didn't accept. Because of all that, she had no pity for Eddie Fuller. You have no idea what love is, Clara said matter-of-factly. Her words made Eddie begin to lose control. His body trembled, spittle wet his lips, veins stood out on his neck. But when his fury overflowed, he turned not against Clara, but against the man he undoubtedly blamed for stealing her away. This is all because of you, Eddie roared at Drake. Let me continue. Completely unhinged, the banker lunged towards his perceived rival for Clara's love, intent on tearing the man limb from limb. Clara was so frightened, she screamed, but Drake was so calm as he was behind the wheel of the Plymouth. Before Eddie could reach him, he was out of his chair. He sidestepped a weak attempt at a punch and then drove his own fist into Eddie's stomach so hard that it lifted the man off the ground. Enough! Eddie wheezed, the air violently driven from his lungs. When he fell to the floor, he lay in a heap, his hands holding his midsection, rocking back and forth, heaving and retching. The next thing Clara knew, she was in Drake's arms, holding him tight, thankful that it was finally over. Come on now, the sheriff said as he pulled Eddie up to his feet. As the banker was led from the parlor, it sounded like he was crying. Once they were alone, Drake asked, Are you all right? Clara nodded. She was about to ask him the same when Edna Gilbert stuck her head through the doorway and said, Looks like you got him. I hope so, Clara answered. Serves him right, the hotel owner remarked with a broad grin. Standing in the way of love like that, I hope he'd be locked up for a long time and they throw away the key. Clara couldn't agree more. Outside, the rain had stopped. Blue sky poked through the disappearing clouds as the sun shone down, its light reflecting off the puddles, passing cars, and the wet sidewalks. Clara and Drake looked up, feeling the warmth of the afternoon, reveling in what had happened. Luring Eddie into their trap had been risky, but somehow everything had worked out. Now they were finally free to start their life together, to let their love blossom. Penny for your thoughts, Drake said. Clara smiled. I was just thinking about how different everything looks now that our troubles are behind us. I wouldn't go that far, he replied. I lost my best friend, my car, and nearly all my savings, which means I can't even open the garage. I suppose you are right, she said, feeling a bit deflated. Drake chuckled. He pulled Clara close, pushing her hair off her cheek and looking deep into her eyes. In the end, none of that is important, he explained. What matters is that I have you. Together, we can do anything. Clara believed him. Ever since their unlikeliest of meetings, her life had undergone one change after another. She had mended most of her troubles with her son, while Tommy had broken off his relationship with Naomi. Eddie's threat of taking away her home was no more, and even though her mother's memory continued to deteriorate, she no longer had to face it alone. But the most unbelievable change of all was having Drake by her side. I love you, she said. He didn't answer with words, but instead leaned down to kiss her, making it clear that he felt the same. What do you say we go celebrate? He asked when their lips parted. Now that sounded like a fantastic idea. Oh, yes, guys, that is the end of the book. Can y'all believe it? If I was reading alone by myself, I would have finished reading this book in 2 days, in 3 days maybe. But reading it with you all for us was exciting. I love it. I love it. That is the end of the book, Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. I hope you all enjoyed that book as much as I enjoyed reading it. This book is set way back in the 1950s. Let me read the epilogue. I don't remember if I had read the epilogue before, but let's just read the epilogue of this book, guys. Oh my. Have a good evening. Stay warm. Clara, Clara waved to Roy Washington as she stepped out of the Sunset and Bank and Trust and into the autumn evening. Darkness was coming fast, the days shortening. A nippy breeze stirred falling leaves, swirling them around her feet and sending a chill racing through her. She stuffed her hands deep in her pockets, desperate for a bit of warmth. Still, as she quickened her pace down the empty sidewalk, her smile was as bright as summer. Her life was good. Ever since Eddie had been hauled out of the hotel parlor by Sheriff Oglesby, everything at the bank had changed for the better. Roy, who had been fired shortly after Thea Fuller's death, was brought back to guide the bank through the turbulent waters Eddie had steered them into. An auditing of the books showed that Eddie had cost them tens of thousands of dollars, mostly out of sheer incompetence. But some funds had been embezzled to buy expensive clothes, drinks, cigars, and other luxurious items that had caught his fancy. That included the money he had attempted to give Drake to leave town. For that, Eddie had been sentenced to 30 years behind bars. At his trial, Clara had expected him to protest his innocence, to complain that he was too important to go to jail, but he had barely said a word in his own defense. Sitting with slumped shoulders, a beaten man, he would never bother anyone, especially Clara, again. She walked past the post office, the grocery store, and the Sunset Hotel, where so much had happened last spring, before finally arriving at her destination. The doors to Solomon Burke's auto garage stood wide open. Inside, two men were bent over beneath an open hood, peering into the engine. Music was occasionally punctuated by the clang of a tool against metal. Even though he couldn't possibly have heard her approach, Drake noticed her arrival. Give me a minute, he said. Clara nodded, stamping her feet in the chill. Of course, This wasn't what they had intended when Drake had first proposed giving up racing and staying in Sunset. But when all his money had been destroyed in the Plymouth crash, his dream had been lost, or at least postponed. Fortunately, he had had no trouble catching on with Solomon. 5 minutes under the hood with Drake would have convinced anyone he was a good mechanic. Because he was easy to work with, as well as a good listener, he immediately fit right in. He still stocked away some much he still socked away as much money as he could afford to save. Maybe he would someday open his own business, or he might even buy Solomon's. Either way, she knew he was happy. Patting his boss on the back, Drake was done for the day. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and began to wipe grease from his hands. He never managed to get them completely clean. Sorry about that, he said. I was never the best when it came to changing the distributor on a V8 engine. Amos had it done down to a science. It wasn't often, but Drake's old friend still came up in conversations occasionally. Miraculously, the thug who had been jettisoned from the Cadillac had survived his injuries. Once he could talk, he had explained that Amos was a morphine addict who had stolen money and drugs from Sweet Woods, a small time hood from St. Louis. He and the other tough guy would also died in the crash with Amos. For months afterwards, Drake had sifted through his years with the mechanic, searching for something, some sign of his drug habit, but had come up empty. Clara suspected that there was a part of Drake that blamed himself for Amos's death. If he had known about his friend's addiction, he could have saved him. So now, when Amos was mentioned, it was always the good things, times on the road and under the hood, never anything that had happened in Sunset. So what's so important to show me that I have to stand out here in the cold? Clara asked playfully. Drake chuckled. It wouldn't be much of a surprise if I just blurted it out, now would it? Come with me, he said. What's that? He led her around the back of the garage, past the Sotas, Chryslers, Oldsmobiles, and other makes, all in various stages of repair. True to his word, one of the first vehicles Drake worked on had been Clara's truck. After his long hours tinkering with it, the pickup ran better than it had in years, though it still occasionally sputtered to a stop if it idled too long. You'll never guess who brought in his car today, Drake said. Who? Wilbur Marsh. That was his Studebaker. You remember Wilbur Marsh, guys? Wilbur Marsh is Naomi's father, wasn't he? He hasn't taken very good care of it. Did he? Did he say anything about Naomi? Not a word. One day, a little over a month ago, Naomi had disappeared from Sunset. Gossip around town was that she had hooked up with a man who had come into the marshland and decided to run off with him. Another rumor was that she was pregnant and had gone to live with relatives in Arkansas. For her part, Clara hoped that Naomi had decided to take a chance and gone to either New York or Hollywood to chase her dreams. Even though the young woman had caused her plenty of sleepless nights, Clara didn't wish her ill. She figured that Naomi deserved happiness, wherever it might be. Who knew? Maybe one day they would meet. There she would. I'm not sure why these people write like that, or there is a missing word in that sentence. Yard Foods is in the place. Welcome, Yard Foods. Hey, Joe. Joe is in the place. How you doing, Joe? We are just reading the epilogue. That's the last part of this story. One day, a little over a month ago, Naomi had disappeared from Sunset. Gossip around town was that she had hooked up with a man who had come into the marshland and decided to run off with him. Another rumor was that she was pregnant and had gone to live with relatives in Arkansas. For her part, Clara hoped that Naomi had decided to take a chance and gone to either New York or Hollywood to chase her dreams. Even though the young woman had caused her plenty of sleepless nights, Clara didn't wish her ill. She figured that Naomi deserved happiness, wherever it might be. Who knew? Maybe one day there she would be, up on a billboard or on the cover of a magazine. Drake suddenly stopped. Close your eyes, he told her. Clara did as she was told. He took her elbow. He took her by the elbow and led her a short distance farther. Open them. A vehicle sat beneath a tarp. It's a car, she jokingly guessed. Give the lady a cigar, Drake shouted like a carnival barker. But this isn't just any old car. This one is special. With that, he whipped away the tarp with a flourish. Even with as little as Clara knew about cars, she recognized its make right away. It was a Plymouth. While it wasn't exactly the same as the one Drake had driven into sunset, it had made it had made it had many of the same features: the curve of the hood, the shape of the headlights and the side mirrors, and the black exterior. It had a few dents in its panel, some rust on its rear, and a crack across the passenger window, but it was beautiful. I got it for a song, Drake explained. Chris Gilliard didn't want it anymore, so I took it off his hands. It still needs a lot of work, but it looks good. The windshield wipers are busted. The trunk has to be forced open, and someone took a knife to the rear seat. But it's on its way. It's on its way to respectability. I never heard that word before. But guys, this is 1954, somewhere thereabout. It might be an eyesore on the outside, but under the hood, it's a thing of beauty. A sudden thought struck Clara, making her smile further. Is this because you want to start racing again? She asked. Drake laughed loudly. No, no, it isn't, he answered. That itch has been scratched. I'm done behind the wheel. He paused. I was thinking that once I got it going, this might be Tommy's. Oh, you see that? Their lives are really coming together nicely. In the months since Drake's arrival, it sometimes felt as if Tommy had changed into a completely different person. Out from under Naomi's influence and with a strong male role model in his life, he was doing better than ever. Together, he and Drake had set about repairing the house. They rehung the fallen gutters, patched the roof, and had finally put the garage doors back up. Resuming an old tradition, all three of them had made almost weekly outings to the movie theater, indulging Tommy's newfound love of monster flicks. Monster flicks? At school, Tommy's grades had started to improve, and he had made a few friends. He still had his moments of teenage rebelliousness, but that was to be expected. Clara didn't mind a little sass now and then, not so long as she had her son back. Unfortunately, though, not everything with her family had gotten better. Christine's memory troubles plagued her more and more frequently. Just yesterday, she had readied a load of laundry to hang on the line to dry. The problem was, it was pouring rain outside. She stumbled on names, forgot familiar phone numbers, blanked on addresses, and had even called Drake, Joe, once or twice. Fortunately, he had taken it in stride, never showing a hint of unease. Late at night, Clara often unloaded her worries to Drake. He always listened carefully, making the occasional comment, promising that they would do whatever they could to help Christine. Often, Clara thought about what he had told her on the porch swing, that as long as they tried as hard as they could, that was enough. She still worried about her mother's future, but she knew they wouldn't let her go without a fight. So do what you want to go for a ride? Drake asked. It runs? She replied. You better believe it does. She opened, he opened the driver's side door. The other door doesn't open so hot, he explained. Clara got in and slid across. Drake followed, put the key in the ignition, and started the Plymouth engine. The rumble was familiar. Are you sure you remember how to drive a car like this? Drake grinned. I couldn't forget, even if I tried. When he drove around to the street, Clara couldn't help but think about how blessed she was to have met him. In the 6 months since Drake had unexpectedly given up racing and settled down with her in Sunset, she had been blissfully happy. But as overwhelming as those few days were, what had followed was even better than what she had hoped for. It was the day-to-day moments that made Clara fall head over heels for Drake. The way his hair was often messed up, how he actually always tapped the wall just inside the kitchen door when he left after lunch. The unrecognizable yet pleasant tunes he whistled while he washed the dishes, but especially how he would surprise her with flowers or a note when she least expected it, just to tell her how much he loved her. Her heart still drummed faster every time she saw him, every time she heard his voice. A week ago, Drake had proposed. Clara had tearfully accepted. Something, something had stirred inside of her. Sometime next spring, they would be married. Tommy had been as excited as she was. Something something for which she would be grateful forever. Later, she learned that Drake had asked her son's permission for her hand. Their ceremony and reception would be a simple affair with music and food, but she was already counting the days. Forever stretched out before them, even after all the heartbreak that had battered her life with Joe's death. Something wonderful had happened. Love had changed her life again. So where do you want to go? Drake asked, his free hands draped over the steering wheel. With you, I'd go anywhere, she told him, as long as we go fast. He chuckled. That I can most definitely do. Whatever road they went down, they would drive it together. And that really ends the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. I hope you all enjoyed the reading as much as I enjoyed reading for us. Guys, that's going to be it for me for today. As far as reading goes, that's going to be it for me for today. I want to say again, thanks to everybody who have come in to the live this morning, and those of you who come here religiously each morning to listen to me read a book. I am forever grateful to you all. Just like Clara is grateful for Drake, I am grateful for you all. And we have our own romance of sorts, not like Clara and Drake, but our own. We have our own little thing going on, don't we, guys? I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you all so, so, so much for coming in. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for each of you. Joe is here, Prince Perel, Winsome, Natals, Dahlia, Cad, Eat Sogi, Things Jamaica, Yard Foods, the amazing M&G, CP, who else? So many of you came in this morning. And guys, don't forget, if you didn't hit the like button coming in, hit the like button on your way out. I sincerely appreciate it. And if you missed the rest of the readings, you can always go back and listen to them. I've made sure to put them in the playlist so you can listen to the reading. Never mind the punctuations in it where I am talking to the people on the live. I sincerely appreciate you all, guys. Thank you all so much again. Until next time, my friends, this is Trev from Trevessence, where your journey matters. Have yourselves a great Friday, everybody. And that's also there's always a happy ending when it comes to fairy tales. Exactly. And this one had a nice ending. I wish Drake had gotten his money back. I wish somehow the bag with the money had survived the fire or flown out of the car, but it didn't. And so is life, guys. We win some, we lose some. We just have to appreciate the wins and the losses and see how much we can survive, how much we can recover from our losses and not dwindle and double in it for the rest of our lives. I'm so glad that Clara was able to find love again. All right, guys, go ahead now and find your love today, be it in someone, love of money, your job, whatever it is. Find your love again and have yourselves a great day, everybody. See you all later.